Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is April 18th, 2024, and you're listening and watching the Daily AI Show live. And today we're here to talk about Stanford University's recent AI Index report that just came out on Monday, so just a few days ago. And this is their 7th edition, and it's 502 pages long. So we will go page by page. And just really break down the intricacies of this. Andy has already raised his hand and said he's ready for this. He doesn't care how long it takes. We are going to dive in. No. So we've got Junmi, we've got Carl, Andy, I'm Brian. We have Beth maybe joining us. I'm not sure. But Beth's hanging out in the green room at the moment as she sets some things up. So we got plenty of people to have a chat and talk about this report. And as I said at the beginning here, look, it's a doozy of a report. In fact, the co-authors said themselves, this is the largest report they've ever done. I'm going to guess that they're going to say this probably every year on out, that this is going to grow and grow as there's more and more emphasis placed on AI. It's a really, really amazing report. And there's obviously a lot to do, but there's a lot to talk about. They break it down into 10 different chapters. And then they've done a really great job at the beginning of the report, giving overall highlights. And then at the beginning of every chapter, they give overall highlights as well. So if you are listening to this show, if you're like, wow, after listening to the folks on the Daily AI Show, I really want to kind of dive into this report, don't fret. You don't necessarily have to go page by page. It's actually very, very well organized. There's hyperlinks in there. And I also want to give them a shout out because something I think that was super cool, guys, is that they give you a link to a publicly shared Google Drive that has all the charts in it. So, and they also tell you how to give them proper, proper citation for them. So if you want to use it in your social media posts or reports or anything like that, they tell you how to do all that. But what's really, really cool to me, because I know we put decks together all the time, talking to sales leaders, and we're talking about the state of AI and who's actually using it and trying to put data behind some of the things we're talking about. And wow, this report really just did me a whole lot of help, because now I can take some of these charts, put them right into our slide decks when we're talking to our clients. Okay, so that's a bit of a start up there, a bit of overall. Is there a place you guys want to dig in first? Is there a meteor section for you? We can kind of break out what the individual chapters about. I know I got a lot of the economy chapter, which is chapter 4, but what do you guys think?
We can start at the top with each of us can offer a takeaway from each of the chapters.
Sure.
And the first chapter is research and development. The things I noticed in this were, one, that there are many countries, or let's call them areas, that are investing in AI. The United States leads all of those alternates, right? China, the EU, and the UK are the leading source of top AI models, and the US is way ahead. But China dominates in AI patents. What's the import of that? Given all of the investment that we're making here, is it that we're not retaining the intellectual property to the degree that China is, despite their much lower investment and much lower productivity in terms of top AI models?
That definitely kind of stuck out to me as well. And I think farther along in the report they talk about also, Andy, their sort of dominance as far as robotics goes. And maybe that's not as surprising or whatever, but they definitely are I think the leader in the world in terms of when it comes to AI robotics and stuff. So maybe the patents are somewhat associated with that part of AI. It's a good reminder too for everybody listening to this. It's AI is definitely, it's diverse. So just saying there's a lot of information about AI jobs and stuff like that. An AI job could be coding.
Let me correct you a little bit on that, Brian. The China dominates in industrial robotics. So that metric, that includes all the factory line robots, not the AI robots necessarily. these could be industrial robotics, could include many different articulate machines
Sure.
that have just direct programming to do a repeat task over and over again.
But in the sense, that's kind of my point, though, in the sense that doesn't include AI. Yes, that's more in the machine learning side of things, probably more than likely. Not do these robots on a line that do a repetitive task also need to have LLMs built in and they need to be able to talk to you? No.
Right.
So that's kind of my point, though, Andy. You were kind of saying what I was going to say, which is that it's so diverse with AI that even when reading a report like this, you have to say, like, okay, well, what do I take away from that? What part of AI are they actually talking about? And it's sort of digging even more there. And that's why, like, you can see the highlights, but obviously you can go to the direct page and get much more detailed into it. Jimmy or Carl, what did you guys think as far as, what they were talking about in the research and development chapter?
Well, I think Andy brought up an interesting question or supposition about China's place with the patent side of things. And so I've been spending a little time investigating the patent process and where it's really applied and how tech companies in the United States approach it. So it appears that most tech companies, they'll kind of blow by patents in favor for trademark and trade secret, right? So there's a lot of building around the brand, being able to sell that as an entire package, a trade secret, as long as you have the right kind of steps and procedures and paperwork, NDAs, mutual NDAs and all that kind of stuff, that can be clamped down. And once you've associated a product with, with a trademark or with a brand, then it's hard to separate those. So it seems like the approach on most of the applications from the tech side seem to be focused on that trade sector as opposed to the patent sector. So that might just be the approach, and it also might be more about the foundational nature of whatever the patent is, right? You would rather patent a method or system of how you achieve a specific goal as opposed to what an end product would be, as opposed to just what the end product would be. I would rather have the patent on circuitry, what is a PCB and how are transistors used, than the computer motherboard at the end.
Or a method patent. There's so many of those. Yeah, the quality of the patents or the domain of the patents, may be very much more scattered in the Chinese applications, which is 7 or 8 times the number of patent filings as for the United States.
And it could also be just a switch in their approach for business that has happened over the last few decades as well. Before it was just manufacture, produce, but now they're inventing. So I think that might just be a big change in how they're approaching their business.
It's also hard to patent something that, within, I don't know, a couple months, couple weeks, you'll get cannibalized by something else, right? So you're right, Jimmy, you have to patent the method. Although that's even hard too, because in the recent, what was it? The VC20 podcast with Sam Altman and Brad Lightcap, he was saying how, like, businesses who are building on top of a GPT-4 type model, the technology is something that, like, he compared it to the iPhone, where in general, the shape of the iPhone hasn't changed. The iOS, although there's a bunch of features, kind of, it's still the same touch capabilities. It's just AI, like the actual fundamental uses changes. So like something like an agents would be completely different. So businesses are kind of used to building this one type of model and then that's it. Or they say that that's the expectation, is the model will never change or the things won't change, but they will change. So you have to be, so it's a completely different mindset on how you're building and the use of these models and how it influences what you're what you're building. And then knowing that these things will change not just in terms of capability, but actual function as well, which then there was a lot of things completely in the loop, out of the loop. And then the patents don't mean anything because it's like, well, yeah, that patent was for GPT-4, but with GPT-7, it does all this stuff. Your patent no longer applies. So that'll be interesting on how those things are enforced too, because even if you have a patent, it's like,
yeah,
yeah,
I think you would definitely want to lean towards using, it's like, we're going to use a transformer based model for the method, as opposed to saying GPT-4 or laying out those
something like
specifics.
that. Yeah.
But I think the highlight there is we need to extract exactly where these patents are being placed, right? Are we talking that I'm assuming that this is more on the international side of things. These are the patent offices of additional countries, not just the United States. And if there's an example of Ubiquity trying to produce the vast majority of the cell phones, right, in the world, and that are being used by the world. We barely use WeChat, but billions of other people use WeChat, right? So it's those kinds of things where, sure, they have far more patents because they're in a far different pool than just what the American companies are dealing with. I'm assuming everyone's going to be patenting worldwide, but I'd love to be able to extract that particular information.
Okay, I think we've nailed chapter 1. Let's find. Let's
sorry, we can go on. Right.
I was gonna say the same thing. I was like, we won't get through any of this on it. Chapter 2 is about technical performance. And I love one of the first things it says in the report is like, as its a summary, is AI beats humans on some tasks, but not all. And then it says AI has surpassed human performance in several benchmarks, including some image classification, vision, reasoning, and English understanding. Yet it trails behind a more complex tasks like competition level mathematics, visual common sense reasoning, and planning. And it's the mathematics one I feel like we've heard a lot. The visual common sense reasoning and planning, I'll be honest, without digging the report, I'm not exactly sure. Obviously visual common sense, that makes sense to me. But I'd be curious if you guys have any more insight on visual common sense reasoning and planning, because there's no commas in there. And I was like, just common sense with what the language model is seeing. Is that what we're talking about? And then trying to make interpretations from it. Is that the way you guys read that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the combination, the multimodal applications are still trying to merge the capabilities of vision and large language. And the AIs are converging rapidly on capabilities approximating human baseline in that graphic. But where you have to think, humans can still look at a table and see what's on the table and make some quick judgments about that because they're familiar with the visualization. We're still in the mode of training the AIs. That's why I think they're still, the AIs are still a little bit behind on the combination of visual and common sense, because they don't have the training yet for that to be able to accomplish reasoning.
You mentioned multimodal, which they bring up as well in chapter 2, and they also talk about higher benchmarks or harder benchmarks emerging, which I thought was a really interesting point, which is that, we've had these sort of standard benchmarks, and it mentions quite a few of them, ImageNet, Squad, Superglue, never heard of any of those, but anyway, benchmarks nonetheless. And they've said that in some cases, the AI is getting so good that we're actually going back towards, human benchmarks, which I think is a lot what we see when we see the rating scales, which is supposed to be, on Hugging Face or GitHub, where it says, 500 people have evaluated this new open source model or whatever the latest, it was Turbo this last week with GPT-4. And they've decided that it's meeting these expectations or whatever. So I just thought it was interesting how they talked about how human evaluation is coming back in the loop, because these models are getting so good that it's actually requiring human benchmark as part of the process in order to evaluate how well they're doing. So just sort of an interesting point there.
which becomes a little more subjective than the benchmark tests,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
I would add though that, like, to me, when I was looking at this section, I was like, well, this section only applies to, I don't even know if it applies today. Like, does it apply to only, like, if the AI is the worst it gets today, then if GPT-5 launches tomorrow, this whole section becomes, what does this mean? Like,
Yeah, that's a
AI
good
beats
point.
humans. It was like, okay, great. Now AI actually beats humans on most tasks.
Yeah.
So
At
like
the
this,
speed that we're moving, this is already dated information. But I think
Exactly,
a big takeaway from the graphic showing that AI beats humans is that, just in the past 5 years, all the lines for all of the different capabilities of AI are shooting up toward and hitting the line in many cases where humans, are the measure, are the baseline. And then the others are just barely under the line and are about to, given the slope of that line, rocket through it. So yeah, give me 6 months and this graph is totally different.
I think that's the problem probably with the report. This is a massive report, and it clearly took hundreds of human hours, right, to create it and put it together and stuff like that. And it does, like, I agree with you. It's like either Malik's book or anything else. The minute you write it on AI, you clearly run the risk of whatever you just said possibly being tragically outdated tomorrow. But I think the report's done a really good job with it. I just want to add one more thing before we move on. It said that it's terms of human evaluation, based on what you said, Andy, is their statement says public sentiment about AI is becoming an increasingly important consideration in tracking AI progress. So I just thought that was a cool sentence to kind of latch onto a little bit. Public sentiment about AI is being increasingly important. So I like that idea of it, is like, we can put all the benchmarks that we want on the world, but ultimately, and sort of where it gets into chapter 4, is who's actually using it, and are they showing, our businesses showing an increased productivity, increased quality. And we're seeing in the graphs, at least from what they show here, yes, that's in fact true. We're seeing up across the board businesses who are deploying AI versus employees who aren't, we can get to it in that chapter, are seeing improved productivity on several different areas, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, so we're still on chapter 2, which is technical performance. And I wanted to highlight 2 things that Beth actually suggested we cover. One of them is that in this rapid approximation of human capabilities, AIs are now training AIs and providing data for AI training. So it's accelerating. And the other point is that while in a later graph, they'll show that there's a rocket ship takeoff in the investment of open source development projects. And there are open source models that are now showing up near the top of the leaderboard. Nonetheless, on important benchmarks close to reasoning and agentic behavior, the closed LLMs, the massive ones that are not available for free use, you have to pay for them, Gemini, OpenAI, etc. Those significantly outperform on those advanced measures.
I saw that too, Andy, and I was kind of shocked by that, to be honest with you. I didn't realize it was such a divide, such a chasm between the two of them. We hear about some of these really impressive open source ones, but yeah, I saw the same thing, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Hey, Beth, I saw that. I thought it was really interesting to see that there was such a difference between the privately held versus the open source ones on there.
Okay, shall we move on to the chapter 3, responsible AI, or skip that and go to economy?
Well, I think maybe the only thing I would say on responsible AI is that it does a great job of breaking down what's going on as far as copyrights. If you want to get as up to date as you can on AI in terms of what's going on with laws right now, copyright infringement, things like we saw happen with deepfakes, with the Taylor Swift story back a few months ago or earlier this year, maybe. The political deepfakes, and obviously there's going to be a lot more of that coming up with at least the U.S. elections, but of course elections around the world. So yeah, it's a really interesting article. We don't necessarily have to hang on it, but I definitely think if you're interested in seeing, go ahead, Jimmy. Yeah,
just one quick, I think important
Sure.
takeaway for the entire chapter is there is not a standardized evaluation
Yeah.
for responsible AI. And so we've got benchmarks for testing and speed and, those kinds of things, but not for responsibility and not for ethics in AI. So I think that might be a good takeaway, because if we develop those standardizations, that would help us move forward a lot quicker in that field.
And that's true without the report, right? That the main models that you hear about are not measuring against the same things across the board,
Mhm.
which I think is why you hear us and you hear other people who are talking about AI going to the arena test, which is like, pit your AI models against each other and then give a human, like, I liked this one better. In a crowdsourced kind of way that gives you some indication, but also we are the ones who are in the arena, right? So we may have slightly different opinions than people who are outside the arena.
Maybe one last. Go ahead, Carl.
I wanted to one thing for the responsible piece here is that I think like this is where open source versus closed source comes big into play, because you can put regulations, everything like that on any closed source model, but an open source model with what you can see and what people are putting out. What if Mistral puts out something, what can anybody do to rein that in? And even the models that are out now, like how can you rein anything in? It's open source. So GPT-5 comes out, you better believe in about 3-4 months or earlier a very similar model comes out. You can rein in GPT-5, but you can't rein in, I don't know, whatever that open Mistral whatever version 9.10b whatever it is. You can't rein that in.
Well,
so I think it's very hard.
A little pushback on that though is, yes, you may not be able to rein in that individual model, but because of the transparency that comes with open source, someone could make a better version of that model, Mistral ethics version, or whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
So,
you can build that, but I think it won't matter, because the people like, well, someone can build an ethical version, but then the other person will be like, why would I use the ethical version if I want to do some nefarious whatever thing?
But then you're just talking about bad actors being bad actors.
Yeah, just being bad actors.
Irrelevant to what they're using, right? So yeah.
The only thing I want to say last on that, but it's just a brief point, is just about the bias and how GPT was found to be more biased towards Democratic in the U.S. And I think it said the Labour Party. I went off the slide, or off the page rather, of the PDF in the UK. And I just think it's something that we need to continue, obviously, to address and bring a lot of attention to, which is that, again, what are the models being trained on? Where did the bias lie? How is it affecting the answers that they give? I could certainly see if you're a Republican in the US and, you're using these tools and you feel like, answers in these language models are a ChatGPT, you're trying to use it like everybody else, and you feel like it's consistently giving you answers that don't align with, maybe how you feel representative. That's definitely a problem. That's, could be half the country, at least just the United States alone. So a valid point. I think it was great to see them break that out in the report as well.
But also in that, and maybe we should have a conversation about that at another time. We have a whole lot more to go through. It's not aligned with a political philosophy. It's aligned with a series of what is good for humanity kind of stuff. It is possible that the parties differ on how they would objectively be rated on that as well. I'm not sure that there are more Democratic writings on free online than there are Republican, but let's move on.
I don't know. That's where I wish we had Robert on the show today, because I am sure Robert would have some opinions on it, which actually I kind of wish we had. We'll definitely get his feedback on it as well. Okay. 4 is I mean, honestly, if you're a business, if you're interested in where AI is going, how it's going to affect your particular industry, stuff like that, you can dive into chapter 4. I really, really like this chapter. They start off with actually a really cool timeline. Probably don't have enough time to really kind of dig into it today, but if you just want, I think it's really important to get these sort of like look backs, because it wasn't that long ago, but in the terms of AI, lots have happened. Just for instance, Microsoft invested 10 billion way back on January 23rd, 2023. And so you're thinking that's 2 months after ChatGPT kind of went live and the whole world saw it, and our version of it, at least 3.5. So it's just really interesting. I mean, March 7th to 23 is when Salesforce introduced Einstein GPT. If you had asked me and polled me on some of these numbers, I would have said they were much more frequent. So it's just interesting. I think important to kind of look back. I find it valuable at least to look at some of these dates and go, oh wow, that was a year and a half ago. That Einstein came out, and then to figure out where it's gone from there. So that's how the chapter starts. There's a ton of good information here, but wanted to call that out real quick.
When I was reading this one, I think compared to what I've been seeing from our clients, it's if you just look at all the key points, there's a lot of investment. There's big organizations that are trying, but I think overall, if you get outside some of the more the big enterprises that are in the news a lot, but if you start going to either other enterprises or go down to medium and small, it's quite a lot less. When they say, oh, we're trying, 55% of organizations now use AI. That can mean a lot of things. It could mean like 2 people could be using it, and that counts as the organization using it. Or there's a bunch of silos in your organization that are using it, or a bunch of individuals, but do they actually have a cohesive AI strategy, plan, execution that is company-wide? That is very less, or integrated into some, critical operations or function. I think that's significantly less, because I think still it's a lot of, we'll test it, and then when we're testing it, we don't actually know the full capabilities of it. So it's still mostly, or if they have adopted Copilot, it's like, I'll just do it to create some content, or organize my or create some spreadsheets and whatnot. So to me, that's what I kind of took away from that. It's like, I think we're maybe still another year away from like really good integrated adoption. And even that, again, back to the interview between Altman and Lightcap and so on, they're saying the enterprise will still, like, they're still going to lead the way, but I think all the other companies are still like, just, they're kind of looking at how to actually use it outside of just ChatGPT.
Yeah, and there's actually some good. I'll find the page, and I wrote down some notes here on what you just talked about, Carl, about the breakdown of where people are finding the most value of using AI in business right now. I wanted to call that just because it's on my screen. Is like, this is AI job postings. So I want to be clear here. This is AI job postings, not all postings. But as a percentage of all job postings, at least in the US, it was interesting to see, like, machine learning is the highest, and even that's at just about 0.7%. If you get down to like generative AI, so a generative AI job posting, for anybody out there who's like, I'm gonna get a job as something in AI for generative AI, that's what I'm gonna work on specifically. That's a half. No, that's 1%. That's a half of a percent is of all job postings, which, look, that still could be hundreds, maybe thousands of jobs. It's just interesting to see kind of like where the percentages are. And I'll be more curious to see how this changes year over year, because I think that you're going to definitely see more generative AI type postings where companies are hiring people to either start up their AI solutions and to come in and do like evaluations within the company and then build it out. No different than you would have somebody who'd said, okay, we're going to start outbound sales. We've only done inside sales up to this point, and now we're going to start doing outbound sales. Inevitably, there's somebody who comes in as like the sort of CRO at that point and has to build it from scratch. And they're going to have past experience and stuff. And I think we'll definitely see more of this in the AI space, where companies say, hey, look, we are now going to push in AI. We need somebody who can who can look at what we have internally, with IT and everything else, and then build a strategy going forward to it.
Yeah.
Let me add that this chapter adds two, I think, assumptions that we've already had, but it validates it with the data, and that is that AI decreases costs and increases revenues for companies who are deploying it, and that workers are more productive and they produce higher quality work when they're using AI.
I think that's it, that point is still tough to get across to many companies. It's like, okay, it does give me more productive, higher quality work. How does it do that? And I think there's room for people like us to connect those dots, because right now it's like people are telling these companies, oh, it does this, this, this. And it's like, well, I don't think ChatGPT allows us to do that. It kind of does it. How else do you connect that? Hey, these are all the ways that you could do it, even with just a large language model. These are the things that you could do to make it better, or even just using a higher model like a GPT-4 or a Claude. That will just level up everybody, but then how to use it too, because it isn't just give me the best spreadsheet ever. No, there's like, it's not, the reasoning isn't that high yet. And maybe 5 changes all that. But I think right now the connection between knowing how to be productive and being productive is there's still a gap there.
Right. This is why you need people like us, right? To help bridge that gap for you in training and consulting and that kind of stuff. Because the asterisk at the bottom of that, at least in the Ethan Mollick study, is that when the worker trusts AI more than their own knowledge, it does not improve their productivity. Right. So that's the gap. That's the piece, which is, again, why the training is important, because you need to be able to like, hey, it's really great for this. And this is that path. If you go this way on the path, ooh, no, that's maybe a problem.
One last thing on this chapter from me, and that is that there's been a big jump in the application of industrial robot installations that are collaborative with the humans, rather than doing their work for them. So that's an important step. The combination, the fusion of large language models and the reasoning capabilities, or the instruction following capabilities, and the conversational capabilities, coupled with mechanical arms, those create industrial robots that can actually work alongside and with the humans, and maybe even be ultimately directed by the humans on the floor.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I wanted to mention from this chapter was, and with more time I pull it up, but it's just the effective GPT use on a group of consultants. So I just want to make sure we've got what this is for. Specifically, it was a Harvard Business School study revealed with access to GPT increased their productivity on a selection of consulting tasks by 12%, speed by 25%, and quality by 40% compared to a control group without AI access. And then it says, likewise, National Bureau of Economic Research reported the call center agents using AI handled 14% more calls per hour than those not using AI. I think that part doesn't surprise me as much, obviously, that, the call centers are going to see such a huge, the AI is going to have such a huge impact there. But I do love this graph, and I'm definitely going to be sharing it as far as the productivity, speed, and quality, because while it is specifically talking about consultants, I would imagine if I'm talking, when we're specifically for my role, when I'm talking to sales reps, sales leaders, sales managers, these kind of people who are in my world, as far as working at scaled, I see a lot of the same types of numbers, whether they're the same or not. The 12% increase in productivity, the 25% increase in speed. We see speed improve all the time. What I really love is that 40% in quality, because that's not necessarily a data point that I probably should lean and point on that more, honestly, as a consultant. And that's that, you're not just doing it faster. The end result, the personalization of it or whatever, is higher quality than if you were to just try to go about it yourself. that alone should be the reason to go do it. The fact that you can get that much higher quality, that much faster, and do it with higher productivity is a win-win-win. And I think what you're talking about, Carl, is like a lot of times, how do we convey this back over to our clients, you know, as for those of us that work as consultants? And I think this is something I need to push and lean on more, is the quality. You know, you're going to get quality improvements, not just speed, because speed without quality, I think Robert talked about that. What's the point, right? Okay. Let's see. I think for sake of time here, let me look at the notes real quick. For the week I've already posted. Yeah. So I think what we're going to do is, obviously we're already at like a 35-minute time and we don't want to go too much deeper on this. Let's dig into chapter 5 here real quick. Give a couple notes on that. And I think what we'll do is there's 5 more chapters and we don't want to speed through them. The report's really, really good. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up another show and we're going to hit the back half on a second part 2 show. Obviously, you know, let us know in the comments and responses whether, you know, that sounds good to you guys as the listeners. But I think that's probably the best move today, so that we don't end up cheapening the back half of the report, which has a lot of great information in it. With that in mind,
it's like healthcare, it's education, it's public like opinion. You totally want the second half of the thing.
Let's jump into chapter 5 though, really quick. Andy, do you have some notes or anything like that in chapter 5? I'm going to pull back over.
Yeah, well, I think that the TLDR of this one is their AI has advanced scientific achievement in a number of different areas. They mention specifically weather forecasting, material discovery algorithms, and importantly in medicine. The AIs, you know, between 2020 and 2023, just 3 years, with a big hockey stick, you know, in the jump from 22 to 23, AI performing on the MedQA benchmark, which is about clinical reasoning. So this is how accurate is the AI in making medical assessments, has jumped to 90% from in 2022 down around 70%. It was below 40% as early as 2020. So rapid advancement in medical knowledge delivered by AI, and that's really promising.
Yeah, and one of the ways that that's happening is the AI can process data that we already have, right? I mean, that's one of the things that is moving things forward, is it's just able to do more of that preliminary, boring kind of research to identify no, dig here, this is an excellent place, where humans, it takes humans much longer to be able to do that.
And I was just going to say, you know, the FDA in the United States isn't exactly known for moving fast. Although, to be fair, that's not really what their goal is to be thorough. But the FDA is not the fastest in the world. And this is from 2022 data. So it'd be interesting to see. It doesn't have any 23 data. But in 2022, the FDA approved 139 AI-related medical devices, which was a 12% increase from 21. Since 2012, the number of FDA-approved AI-related medical devices has increased by more than 45-fold. AI is increasingly being used for real-world medical purposes. And again, that's 2022. I'd really be curious to see how much of a leap from 12% it's 2023, and obviously getting into this year as well, we won't know. But I thought that's just like, kind of, you know, that, but then you see a number like that and you're like, oh my God, 139 just in 1 year is really, really impressive. And maybe that's machine learning, like we were saying, Andy. That doesn't necessarily mean it has anything to do with LLMs or anything like that. It could just be, you know, other assisting types of devices and stuff. Okay. Any other thoughts before we wrap up this first half? And then we'll obviously put something on the calendar for probably 2 weeks out from now to hit the second half as well. But any other thoughts before we wrap it up?
I really wanted to get in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, Carl, go.
No, I just want to say I was getting excited about the education piece, because I think that's like, of all the things, that would be we could spend like a good show on that, because I'm really interested in that particular section. Yeah,
100%.
It's definitely one of the silos that people look for. If you are intimidated by this report, don't worry about it. It's got like levels coming in. Go ahead and look at it. It's not like 500 pages. Oh my God, that's all words. It's not.
Yeah, it's great.
Go to the link, chapter by chapter as well. So
it's okay.
Yeah, I fully intend to dig deep. I think eventually I will read all of this. I just think it's so valuable. Chapter. So just to be what's coming up, chapter 6 is about education. Chapter 7 is about policy and governance. Chapter 8 is about diversity, and we do a whole show on that. Chapter 9 is public opinion. And I'm sorry, there's only 9 chapters. I thought there was 10. My apologies there. So
There
4
are
more
10
chapters.
key takeaways.
And thank you. We will come back to all these because as you said, Carl, and everybody else, I mean, we know we can spend plenty of time talking about education, policy, all these things. So we'll wrap that up for today. Tomorrow, and by the way, maybe some of this will come up in the tomorrow show because tomorrow is our what did we just say about AI? It's our ability every 2 weeks to sort of stop, not necessarily talk about a new topic, but talk more about the topics we've covered in the last 2 weeks. And we've covered a lot, from gadgets to this report to a whole bunch of other stuff. So come on back tomorrow. You might hear more of this report come up as well as other topics as well. And then we have a whole bunch more interesting topics for next week that I'm really excited to dive into. So until then, have a great one, and we'll see you tomorrow. Okay.
Aloha.